I heard that last year, the Earth's surface temperature increased by 1.45 degrees Celsius in comparison to the pre-industrial days. What is so concerning about that?
I actually did a piece recently talking about climate tipping points, which are processes that when you set it off, it becomes self-perpetuating. For example, the melting of the West Antarctic ice sheet. As ice melts, you expose either rock or you lead to ocean water being exposed, which are darker surfaces, which are going to absorb more light. And that creates a warming effect, which then leads to more ice melt. And so you have some of these effects on the planet, right? Back in 2015, we were projected to warm by about 4 degrees Celsius by 2100 based on current trends.
wow.
Today, that number's down to about 2.7, and that's due to technology and policy advancement over the last 10 years. So there are certainly some significant effects to warming by 1.5, and that's why we want to keep it under 1.5. The tipping points are where it gets concerning, right? Because once you kick one of these things in, then you start to see it self-perpetuate. But that doesn't mean it's going to end the Earth. It means it will change in some way that is irreversible for some time. So it's here now. When people talk about climate change as a problem for your children or grandchildren, we're past that. It's happening now. Anyone on Earth today has experienced it. Anyone who was born, I think, after 1974 has not experienced a climate that is average for the 20th century. It's been hotter than average since then. We're living it now, but that doesn't mean we can't make this a lot better.
Welcome to Curiousaholic, the show where we question the past and imagine the future. In today's episode, we spoke to Ethan Brown. Ethan is a climate advocate and has studied environmental analysis and policy. He also has a podcast called The Sweaty Penguin. This podcast presents the myriad of climate change issues in a more entertaining and fun way, just so you don't get too bored with all these complex problems that are going on in the world. So if you want to check out his podcast, make sure you do. And, if you want to support this podcast, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and comment on YouTube. That's primarily where our podcast is based. That really helps us to grow the show and to provide better content for you guys. So if you want to do that, we really appreciate it. And without further ado, here is Ethan Brown. Ethan, are the efforts to curb climate change for the sake of humanity, or do you think they're for the sake of our planet? Do you think sometimes we act in our own self-interest, or do we truly care about the future of our planet?
Coming out of the gate strong.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
No problem.
Yeah, I don't think it has to be one or the other. I think that certainly in my point of view, humanity is what's important. We need to protect ourselves, but I think protecting the Earth is an important part of doing that. And a lot of what I like to talk about in my work is how climate solutions and environmental solutions don't have to be sacrifices necessarily. They can also help the economy, also help justice, health, national security, etc. So that's what I get excited about, that these don't have to be trade-offs. We can do both at once.
Yeah, and how do you think we could find that balance? Like I know you mentioned that's what you like to focus on in your field. Like how do you think we think about our planet, but also we can think about ourselves and how we could thrive as a species?
Yeah, our economy is really based in the existence of natural resources, right? Food, medicine comes from nature, really everything, wood to build houses or any materials. So that's where we start. And we want to preserve that for both ourselves and for future generations. What that looks like, that's where we get into this discussion, right? Are there trade-offs or are there not? And my feeling is if we can be very creative about the technologies that we create, the policies we create, the ways that we consume these resources, that allows us to be able to sustain these things both today and into the future. And we don't necessarily have to worry about picking one or the other. We can do it all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said. Yeah, I think so too, that we should strive to get the balance between both sides. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Not exclusively think of one, right? Yeah. So we know that climate change, fluctuates throughout millennia. It seems like more recently, though, the impacts and the changes that we are experiencing seem to be worse than in more recent years. Why do you think that is the case?
Yeah, climate change has happened all throughout history, right? For a variety of reasons. What we're seeing in the last 100 years or so is a much faster rate of climate change. And that is due to something called the greenhouse effect, which is where carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, a variety of gases that primarily come via fossil fuel combustion, but also a few other areas. They emit these gases and they basically act as a blanket where the more that we emit, the more that they insulate the earth. That's the same reason why Venus is super hot, right? So we have that effect going on, and that's causing what is really an unprecedented global warming. So what that means, we can see extreme weather, heat waves, hurricanes, droughts, wildfires. All of these have their own stories. We also see effects in food production and so many different areas that we can get into. But that's really what the concern is today. Obviously, it's happened forever, but today is a little different, and that's comforting because if we're causing it, we can fix it.
Yeah, we had our fair share of wildfires here in Canada last year. It was yeah, first time we experienced that. I mean, usually we always hear about wildfires like in the U.S. I know it happens a lot, elsewhere in the world, but here in Canada I had never seen anything like that.
It happens, but yeah, last year in
Not
Quebec
like that.
especially was yeah, it was so intense last year in Quebec that the air quality was so bad at one point. Montreal's air quality was considered the worst in the world for a day there.
Yeah.
It was pretty bad.
Yeah, it was like kind of like hazy outside, like kind of
Yeah,
yellow looking. It
amber.
was amber looking. Yeah, it was a bit weird. Yeah, and I heard this year we might be bracing for some more wildfires. So I'm hoping we won't have to endure that.
Yeah, what's important to know with wildfires is climate change doesn't cause them, but climate change can make them a lot worse. So they're often caused by it can be lightning strikes, it can be a variety of things, but here in the US, 85% of wildland fires are caused by human activities. And in fact, a lot of the Canadian fires were caused by human activities, things
Mm.
like leaving campfires unattended, leaving cigarettes on the ground, faulty hot tub wiring, all these things that are just human stupidity. And so, what climate change then does, climate change will make your forest drier, it'll make it hotter, it'll bring new pests and diseases. And all of these factors can essentially weaken the forest health, create more tinder for a fire to expand. It can also lead to more winds that can lead the fire to blow to new places. But the initial fire comes from something else. So, in talking about wildfire solutions, I think it was scary to see what happened in Quebec last summer, but
Hmm.
it's good to know that even with climate change, yes, we want to mitigate climate change, but we can also do these other things to mitigate the risk of wildfires just by not doing these stupid things. Also, there's strategies like thinning, removing brush, various forest management techniques that can help as well.
Yeah, good to know.
And just in line with the question that Evan asked regarding how we've had during history of our planet different changes of climate. So what would you say, because some people say, oh, well, like thousands of years before there was an ice age and then there was this different climate that like killed off a bunch of species and then, the planet survived and it continued. And they're saying maybe this is just part of that or maybe it's another cycle we're going through. Could there be at certain moments where we might not have an effect really, but the Earth still goes through a dramatic change in climate?
Yeah, so there's a variety of factors that can contribute to the Earth's climate changing. It can be changes in solar activity, changes in volcanic activity. Obviously, if there's a ton of dust up in the air, it'll kind of cool the Earth off.
Mm.
There's a lot of different factors like that that can occur. What we've seen now, we know for a fact, is due to human greenhouse gas emissions, especially in the last 70 years or so. We've seen solar activity has been pretty stagnant. I believe volcanic activity has been having a cooling effect, if anything, or maybe I have those two mixed up. But regardless, we know for a fact that it's carbon emissions and greenhouse gas emissions. And by the way, it's the same scientists who figured out all this stuff about the climate over the last hundreds of thousands of years that are the ones telling us what's going on today and that are concerned about it. And I've had the opportunity to interview and speak with many of them. And I think that I certainly take their word for what's going on, but also have I got a degree in environmental analysis and policy. I did the research myself too.
Yeah, for sure. I think after the decades of research and facts that have come up about climate, I think it is undeniable that humans do have an effect. Yeah, I mean, to what degree, it's always debated, but I think the effect is there, and every year the temperature is increasing. Like, that's a fact. And what we want to kind of talk about now is sort of what's fact and what's myth, and certain solutions that are touted as, the all savior of climate change. And one of them,
none of those.
There are none of those. Yeah, well, that's the thing.
Yeah, it's
Well,
a complicated issue for sure.
it's a complicated issue, but a lot of people, for example, right, gasoline cars are the biggest evil now, and electric vehicles are touted as the best thing since sliced bread. So, for example, here in Quebec, they want to ban the sale of gasoline cars by 2035. It still hasn't come into law, but they're pushing towards that. So, what are your thoughts on that? For example, governments legislating the ban of gas cars. Do you think the infrastructure is there? Do you think, first and foremost, electric vehicles are a good solution?
I think electric vehicles are one piece of the puzzle, and I'll get to the policy in a second, but electric vehicles themselves certainly have a positive impact on the climate. They don't make it completely carbon neutral because there is the manufacturing of the vehicles, and then also depending on where the electricity comes from. If you have a completely clean grid, that's awesome. If you don't, it may be more like a 50% reduction in emissions. But regardless, it's a reduction. That's good. There's a lot of exciting benefits with electric vehicles beyond just climate. There's also some hurdles. We need to mine these minerals. We need to get the charging stations set up. We need the electric grid capacity. All this stuff has to get done. And there are ways to do that, but it has to happen. If everybody's driving an electric vehicle, we can't snap our fingers. So these bans, I think, a lot better than if you said ban it next year or something. 2035, you still have time. And these typically are banning the sale, which means you can still drive your current gasoline-powered vehicle. That said, I tend to think there are better options than bans. I'm someone who wants consumers to be able to choose what they want and compare the options. But I think that you can construct policy in a variety of ways to incentivize the transition. Really, what you want to do is see electric vehicles become cheaper and better than gasoline-powered vehicles. And it's headed in that direction. There are already comparisons where you see electric vehicles beating out gasoline-powered vehicles. I think that's going to improve. And furthermore, once you have the vehicle, you are spending a whole lot less on electricity than you do on gasoline. So that's a perk too. So it's a process, and I think that some of these bans, it's hard to say whether they'll be a disaster or whether the economy is going to catch up to it. Certainly, automakers seeing these bans know they got to kick into gear, but you need the infrastructure, you need the electric capability, and you also need alternatives. You don't want everyone driving a vehicle. If public transit is better, if you can bike, if you can walk, if you can work from home and have broadband internet, these are all ways to create more clean transportation.
I agree.
Yeah, like for Quebec, I'm not sure we have that infrastructure set up right now. Like I feel like they
Not
keep
yet.
pushing the deadline, further and further. First it was 2030, now it's 2035. I feel like they might push it even further because, like you said, we need to be properly established before we take the step and go for all EV vehicles in sales.
But I think a point that you made there, public transit, it's such a underutilized mode of transport. in just, North America, Western countries in general, where you can save so much, even more than, everyone driving an electric vehicle. If 50 people are in a train or bus, that's way less carbon, even if, everyone drove an electric vehicle. And yeah.
Yeah. I used to live in California, and I was in Orange County for about a year and a half, which is about an hour south of Los Angeles. And the I-5 South, which is the highway that runs from Los Angeles through where I was down to like San Diego, that was considered the most congested road in the country. Drivers lost, I think, 89 hours on average per year on that road, which,
Wow.
if you math out, is like thousands of dollars of lost income. And there's a train line that runs parallel to it that is constantly out of service, and to the point where I never even actually, no, I did use it a couple times, and one of the times actually we got stuck because of a wildfire on the tracks. So
Oh wow.
Wow.
that was when I caved and got myself a car. But that's for myself, as someone who doesn't like driving and is a climate advocate, and I couldn't handle California without a car. Like, you can see the problem. So I think that it's very important because electric vehicles might help with the climate thing, but they don't fix that major traffic issue. Whereas if you improve the public transit, you can do both at once and save people money. So I think there's a lot of pieces to it. And sometimes we get a little too focused on EVs as a silver bullet when it's really just one piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen that picture of like a highway in China where all like the lanes are converging into one? It makes this huge traffic jam.
No, I haven't.
No.
Can we pull it up?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we'll share the screen. It's just
Okay.
like just a little aside here. It's crazy.
Well,
to see.
I think it's like a road where there's a toll, and it's like a bunch of vehicles that converge into one point, and it's creating this traffic scene. Let me see if I can. Oh yeah, here it is.
Yeah, I think we found it. It's
Oh my God. What?
yeah, look at
What's
that.
happening? It doesn't even look
wild.
like a road.
I don't know how many lanes that is. It must be like 20 plus lanes.
it's-
At least.
I forgot where it was exactly, but yeah, it's somewhere where.
Go up. I think it's right there. It's stuck in Beijing traffic on 50-lane highway.
No. But I think the news is getting it wrong. It's not a 50-lane highway.
It's not 50, but that's a lot.
But that's a
Oh my
lot.
God,
yeah,
yeah.
it's where it opens up for people to cross.
Yeah.
The toll there.
Yeah, so to your point,
Wow.
I don't think EV vehicles can fix this problem.
Yeah, because literally, if everyone drove a car, we would end up in
Exactly, yeah.
a situation like this.
Yeah, obviously this is an extreme
And
example.
while you're
but-
stuck in traffic, you're still you're not consuming nearly as much electricity, but you're still consuming it to keep the AC on or your music or whatever. So, and that's actually a big issue with the gasoline powered vehicles. Even just reducing traffic reduces the amount of gas you use. So it's a great solution.
Yeah. So would you say like honestly, objectively, a better solution would be to promote better public transit than having more infrastructure for EVs?
I think all of the above. And again, because public transit is not going to work for everybody. You have people who are working in construction that aren't going to bring wood pallets on a train. But
course.
I think that each solution has its pros and cons. And what tends to work best is if you can get all these solutions working together, competing against each other, and consumers can choose what they like best.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I heard that last year, like the Earth's surface temperature increased by 1.45 degrees Celsius in comparison to the pre-industrial days. Like, why is that so concerning? What is it about that? They want it to not exceed 1.5 degrees. Like, what is so concerning about that?
Yeah, so it's slightly arbitrary, but it also isn't. As you go, you get worse and worse impacts. But I actually did a piece recently talking about climate tipping points, which are basically processes that when you set it off, it kind of becomes self-perpetuating. And so, for example, the melting of the West Antarctic ice sheet. As ice melts, the ice is very light. It reflects sunlight. As it melts, you expose either rock or you lead to ocean water being exposed, which are darker surfaces, which are going to absorb more light. And that creates a warming effect, which then leads to more ice melt, which then leads to more. And so you have some of these effects on the planet, right? There was a study done, I think, in 2022 that looked at 16 climate tipping points. And the good news is, back in 2015, we were projected to warm by about 4 degrees Celsius by 2100 based on current trends.
Oh, wow.
Today, that number's down to about 2.7. And that's due to technology and policy advancement over the last 10 years. Just based on current policies, we would drop from 4 to 2.7, which I think is pretty good. I mean, we got to keep going, but that's progress, and that shouldn't be understated. And with those tipping points, 14 of them would be crossed at 4 degrees Celsius. Only 7 are crossed at 2.7. So that cuts it in half. But 4 of those 7 would actually be crossed at 1.5. I believe the melting of the Greenland ice sheet, melting of West Antarctica, coral reefs, and one other that isn't fresh in my mind. So there are issues like that can spiral once you get to 1.5. Granted, that doesn't mean humans are going extinct or it's the end of the world, but it is pretty bad, right? Especially when you have melting ice sheets, sea levels will rise tremendously. A lot of our cities are on coasts, and coral reefs actually act as a barrier on coastlines to protect them from sea level rise. So you want those healthy too. So there are certainly some significant effects to warming by 1.5, and that's why we want to keep it under 1.5. The other thing to know, though, just because we cross it in 1 year doesn't mean all these things are going to happen. We're talking about crossing it for 5-10 years and staying above that, the trend line being above 1.5. And even if the trend line does get above 1.5, we can bend it back down by becoming carbon negative in the future, by reducing emissions as much as we can, and then planting more trees, getting carbon capture, all these technologies that can suck carbon back out of the atmosphere. So it can pull us back under. So I believe we can stay under 1.5 by 2100. And I believe it's actually economically beneficial if we do, because a lot of these technologies can also create jobs, help us grow our economies, save money. But yeah, that's kind of the task at hand, and that's part of why 1.5 is a key target.
Okay.
That's really interesting. I'd never heard of those tipping points. That's cool. So what did you say is like the top value that we really shouldn't exceed to not surpass those 16 tipping points?
So the first 4 kick in at 1.5. The next 3 are kind of in the 2 to 2.5 range. And then there were a few around 3 to 3.5. And then I think 4 or 5 around 4 degrees. And then the remaining 2 were a little bit further out. But again, current policy has us down to 2.7. So I don't even talk past 2.7 anymore, because we would have to reverse policy and reverse course to get worse. And every trend suggests that we're only getting better. So again, 1.5 is a really key goal. I think it's a good goal. But I also don't want to discount the progress we've made over the last decade.
Okay, but crossing 1.5 is still like not good. I mean, you were talking about 2.7 and further.
It's not good right now, right? You're in Quebec. You saw what happened. But
okay.
But again, the more that we can prevent, the better off we'll be.
So from what I understand, I think it was a good point like you made there that goes against a bit of the fear mongering that's going around, because we always hear about, once we cross this point, there's no turning back. It's done. As if we're falling off a cliff. The climate is going to hell. But what you said there was we might cross the 1.5, but if it stays on that course, that's when it's bad. Climate is more of a kind of slow process, a slow burn, no pun intended, but we can reverse it, right?
It really, yes. But like I said, the tipping points are where it gets concerning, right? Because once you kick one of these things in, then you start to see it kind of self-perpetuate. But that doesn't mean it's going to end the earth. It means it will change in some way that is irreversible for some time. But that doesn't mean we can't prevent a lot of other damage from happening. And in fact, coral reefs, I mentioned that as an example, coral reefs are extremely resilient. We see a lot of bleaching events, but then they bounce back. And again, we don't want to push them past a tipping point where they can't bounce back. But that's one example where, say, things get pushed a little far, but then we pull it back, maybe they can bounce back from it. So yeah, we know enough science to know these are possibilities, these are likely, but these are all just predicted within degrees of likelihood. It's not this is going to happen once we cross 1.5 degrees Celsius. There's a chance that this will happen at 1.3, there's a chance it'll happen at 1.7, and how exactly it will play out, we don't know, but we know this is a possibility. We know what the consequences of that would be, and we know how to fix it.
Yeah. So last year we reached up to 1.45 degrees increase, and you said that when we get close to that 1.5, there could be some irreversible damage. Do you think we did do some damage last year, and do you think this year we could also have some? Not to freak people out, or
yeah, we've done damage already. I hate to say it, but you saw the wildfires last summer, the hurricanes that have continued. I think 30% of Pakistan got flooded in 2022. There's been some really awful events around the world that climate change has contributed to. So it's here now. When people talk about climate change as a problem for your children or grandchildren, we're past that. It's happening now. Anyone on Earth today has experienced it. Anyone who was born, I think, after 1974 has not experienced a climate that is average for the 20th century. It's been hotter than average since then. So we're living it now, but that doesn't mean we can't make this a lot better. And again, if we warm by 1.7 versus 2.7, that's a hugely better outcome. And that's something where if we pull it down to there, then we keep going and we make it carbon negative and we keep pulling it down to where it's meant to be.
Yeah, we shouldn't just stop at one point and say, oh, this is good enough. No, we should always keep trying to push back.
Yeah. And that's my one thing with the 1.5 is I don't want people to hear I think some headlines even said we crossed 1.5 last year, but it's going to happen in the next 5 years or so where the Earth crosses 1.5 for a year, but there's always blips. We had an El Nino last year, which contributed as well to the warmer surface temperature. And so I don't want people to see a blip one year and say, oh, we're over 1.5, it's over.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's good that you clarified that. Yeah.
Because, for example, this year, I was going to say, like, our winter in Quebec especially has been very warm. Like, very
one of the weirdest winters I've ever seen here. Like usually here in Quebec it's very cold, a lot of snow.
Like right now there should be a bunch of snow, but it's dry.
It's just dry. Plus 15 sometimes, it's like really crazy.
Yeah. It bounces. I mean, before last year, the hottest year on record was 2016, and that was because there was an El Nino that year. Yeah. But beyond that, I think it was like 2020, 2021, and that was when we were in a La Nina, which is supposed to be colder years. So that gives you a sense of how climate change has pushed things. But again, we have that little bit of natural fluctuation as well. So if 1 year crosses 1.5, that doesn't mean the trend line has crossed 1.5. And even if the trend line does cross 1.5, we can bend it back down. So I don't want people to lose faith if we do cross over, but we can't cross over for long, or we shouldn't cross over for long.
Yeah, and you said that you want people to maintain faith, and one of the things that people do to fight back against climate change and what they can do themselves is they tend to recycle, right? Can you explain if recycling is as effective as we think it is?
So I actually work part-time for a group called Earth Angel Sustainable Production Services, where I go on film and TV and commercial sets and help with trash sorting and some other stuff too. So I recycle all day sometimes, so I don't want to trash it too much. But there are misconceptions about recycling. Um, it's not as much a climate solution as it is a solution for landfill waste, ocean waste. That said, there are climate consequences of those activities, so do with that what you will. But certainly, if we're talking about individual actions to help the climate, recycling, that's not really the issue that it's meant to solve. Also, you need to know, and this is just a problem with recycling in general. Every town seemingly has its own rules about recycling, and that needs to be standard across the board because it's too complicated for every single person to know wherever you go you might not be able to recycle this or you can recycle this. There's actually not even a trademark on that little triangle symbol, so there are some companies that will put that symbol on non-recyclable products just to look more environmentally friendly. So that's an issue. And then also, if there's like one thing that's wrong in a recycling bag, that can contaminate a whole load, and then it often just gets sent to a landfill. So there are issues with recycling, and it's led to a situation. I think this is the United States where only like 9% of recycled products actually get recycled, or recyclable products get recycled. And we can do a lot better. And there are benefits to recycling. You don't want this stuff in landfills. You don't want it in the ocean. And if you recycle it, you can put it back into the economy and reuse it and actually make money as opposed to have it sit in some landfill somewhere. So it's certainly a beneficial thing, but we have to get better at it. And one other thing I'll say, when we talk about reduce, reuse, recycle, that's the order of priority. They're not equally useful. Reducing is going to have the most impact. If you need to use something, reusing it will have the next best impact. And then recycling would be third on that list.
That's a good point. And in conjunction with that, would you say that the burden should be more on companies to try to make things that are more reusable and less polluting?
I think, yes, it should be on companies to do that. And if companies do that and they advertise it and there's the right consumer protections in place where people know that the information they're getting is correct, they'll be more inclined to buy it. There's a lot of evidence that shows that people, especially in my generation, are willing to spend more to support companies that are doing environmentally friendly things. So it's actually in companies' best interests to do that sort of thing. But additionally, I think the whole process of recycling needs to be simpler, needs to be, especially, there's a lot of low income and minority communities that don't even have access to recycling. So I was about to say educate people on recycling, but that's kind of insensitive for people who don't even have recycling. Get them recycling, educate them about recycling, and make the process a lot easier so that we can actually streamline it and accomplish what we want.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah. There is a lot of misinformation, I have to say. Like, even here, sometimes I'm like, do I recycle this? Do I not recycle this? And do I need to wash the inside? Because sometimes it's dirty and I'm like, it might just contaminate. And the horror stories that I've heard of what people throw in recycling bins, from like diapers to all sorts of stuff. And I'm just like, I've heard some people use the recycling bin. Like, but here, for example, like I don't know, I'm very skeptical of like how here in Montreal, Quebec, they recycle. A lot of people call the recycling bin just a second garbage bin, as sad as it is. But yeah, I think the lack of standard and education is just making people just do whatever, really, at the end of the day.
So you think the recycling, rules should be standardized everywhere so that everyone should know what they can and cannot recycle?
Yeah, I think ideally it's one system that everyone does the same way. Ideally, one that recycles everything that can be, right? And then you just gotta make sure companies play their part, individuals know what they have to do. If you make it as convenient as possible, I think people are good natured and will put the thing in the right bin, but you need to make it easy. Once it gets difficult, then people are not gonna cooperate.
Okay, and for the people listening, what would be on your list as the things you should be able to recycle?
I mean, it's in a dream world, you can recycle everything, right? But it's not up to me. I think, I mean, the stuff that we recycle on sets are uh, obviously plastic bottles, and although we also try to make sure there aren't any plastic bottles on set and yell at people if they bring them. But paper is recyclable, cardboard's recyclable, a lot of plastic products, soda cans or water cans or whatever. Yeah, I mean, all the basics, but
Okay.
really making sure people know what they can recycle and can do it easily and it's going to the right place.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. There is also another thing that people tout as a solution that relates to our diets, right? A lot of people say the consumption of red meat is one of the biggest, emitters of methane because of the cows and whatnot. And an alternative is to adopt a vegan diet. What are your thoughts on that?
How much time do we have?
Take your time all day.
So I'll preface by saying I love red meat and can't give it up. But
Oh no.
the issue is a real issue. So cows do belch methane. It's part of their digestive process where they eat grass. It produces methanogens in their digestive tract, and then they actually do a thing where they like burp up the grass again and chew it a second time and then send it to a second chamber, and that burping is what creates that methane. So it is a real issue. Not the only issue with cattle raising. A lot is actually done in the Amazon rainforest, and they cut down trees to create cattle ranches, and that's a big issue. Even in the US, you sometimes see a little bit of that, although we're also fortunate to have a lot of just prairie land that would have no better use than to raise cattle. And then their poop actually emits a lot of stuff too. And then also growing their feed. To grow corn and soy, you often need nitrogen fertilizers, which, if applied improperly, can create nitrous oxide, which is a greenhouse gas 300 times as impactful as carbon dioxide. So there's an impact. But there are solutions besides telling people what they can and can't eat. If an individual wants to make an impact, then reducing their red meat is as big a thing as you can do to reduce your personal carbon footprint. But there are other solutions too. I got to interview an expert who actually is working on developing seaweed additives to cattle feed that changes the reaction in their stomach to not produce methane. And it
Interesting.
works.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so that's one option. I've seen other stories of other additives like onions and garlic and what have you. So if that kind of thing is adopted, you can make a big difference. And then also looking at land use, making sure we're raising cattle on land that is right for it, right? If we're doing it on land that's already grass and isn't going to support a forest, that's a lot better than cutting down the Amazon rainforest to raise cattle. So there's a lot of solutions here. And you also want to work with farmers, make sure these solutions are going to be workable for them, profitable for them. But there's more to this than just telling people what they can and can't eat, because not only do I not want to see people forced into these decisions, but I don't want to see farmers out of work because we all changed our diets. They can be part of the solution.
And how much of the total emissions does the, emissions from red meat actually contribute? Is it like a large percentage or is it like a smaller amount?
I believe agriculture as a whole is close to 30% of global emissions. And within that, cattle, I don't know the exact number. It's the highest emitting food for sure.
Okay.
But again, some of that comes from, it's not all the methane. Methane is part, land use is part, feed is part, manure is part.
It's all
Adding
combined.
up.
Yeah. Compounded. Yeah. Interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. That thing you said that they add into the feed of the cow that reduces the methane. I had never heard of that. That's an interesting solution.
Yeah. Do you
Yeah.
know the name of that additive?
I forget the name of the seaweed plant, but it's
Oh,
a
it's a
type of
seaweed
seaweed
plant.
that has
Okay.
that effect.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Huh.
I mean, yeah, there's all these, myths and, facts that we're trying to kind of debunk here with you. So appreciate your insight on all of it.
Yeah,
No,
there's
for
always
sure.
a lot of nuance to every single issue and
Yeah.
solution, and that's what I love exploring.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. It's really not a clear cut, because some people are just like, you need to adopt a vegan diet. Vegan diet all across. Everyone should, stop eating animals, and it's gonna fix things. And it's like, okay, but then you like eating fake meat, or you like eating or drinking, I don't know, almond milk, which I've heard uses so much resources to make. Even vegan stuff can also have a negative impact. So it's not a black and white as we think.
Everything has an impact, and they are
Yeah.
correct that plant-based foods have a lower impact than meat and dairy. And it's actually a very simple calculation, because when you think about it, there's something called a feed conversion ratio, which is basically how much feed does it take to grow an animal 1 kilogram. And
Mhm.
for chicken, it usually will be around like 1.7 to 2 kilograms of feed to grow a kilogram. For cattle, it'll be maybe 6 kilograms of feed to grow a kilogram. But you see right there the problem. It takes more feed to grow the animal than it does to, like, you end up with a kilogram of corn versus versus 1.7 kilograms to grow the chicken, or 6 to grow the cow. So that in and of itself creates the disparity. That said, we would not be healthy if we all lived on a diet of corn, and I think it's pretty miraculous that pigs can turn corn into bacon. So I think that there's trade-offs.
That is a miracle. Yeah.
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 So I think that it does have a positive impact, and I wish, as much as I personally can't and won't go vegan, that people light off the vegan bashing a little bit, because regardless of their reason, and sometimes they can be annoying, but they are doing us a solid by choosing to do that. So I always try to give them my support, even if I'm not doing it myself.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I think like you said, to every solution there are pros and cons, right? I mean, what the vegans are saying to do is to, just stick to that kind of food and it will reduce the impact, but at the same time you have to weigh out the negatives, right? Like you can't enjoy some food that you might love, right?
Or maybe the preparation might be tougher, or
Yep.
Yeah.
the lack of protein, right, is a big thing with like the vegan diet, where you need to work harder to get the amount of
You can get your protein, but you got to do it. And I think I've seen
Yeah,
some
you gotta
vegans
put in
you
the
gotta
extra
just-
mile.
don't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, with meat is easy, you just eat it, but with
Yeah.
vegan diet you have to prepare it.
Yeah, it's harder. Have you seen like the COP28 conference that happened at the end of last year? What are your thoughts on the leader of this conference being like a rich oil CEO? Wasn't that like kind of like a conflict of interest?
You could say. I think so. This guy, to his credit, was also a guy who did a lot of work in renewable energy in the United Arab Emirates, and his way of justifying himself was that he knows the fossil fuel world, he knows the climate world, he can be the guy to bring these people to the same table and get stuff done. Whether that was a accurate pitch or not is for sure up for debate. I mean, he ran the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, but the conference itself, because the conference happened, so now we can just look back at, was he successful at that or not? And there were pros and cons to this conference. There was a large fossil fuel contingent there, and I don't think they were trying to strike climate deals. I think they were trying to strike natural gas deals. But what the conference did accomplish, first off, it what was the phrase they used? It made a big step with the loss and damage fund. So this was something that they agreed to at COP27, which is basically going to have wealthier nations put some money into a fund for developing countries who get whacked by like that flood in Pakistan I was talking about, or even some countries in even worse shape who are getting hit really hard by the climate crisis and don't have the funds to deal with the damage that happens. We can only adapt and mitigate so much damage is happening now. So that fund was established at COP27, but they didn't figure out any details as to how the fund would work. And so they operationalized, I think that was the word they used, the fund at COP28. The other big thing that happened was the final agreement had in it, basically countries said that they would commit to a transition away from fossil fuels in a just, orderly, and equitable manner. And believe it or not, this is the first time that fossil fuels were mentioned in a multilateral climate treaty by name, which is wild to think about, but
Why is
it
that?
happened.
That's weird.
And to get all 197, 98 countries in the world to sign on to that, including the US, including China, including Saudi Arabia, including Russia, including everybody, agreed to a transition away from fossil fuels. That's not binding. That doesn't mean they have to, but they said they'd do it. And often by signing these things, that does lead to more accountability. It leads to getting people in the room and sharing solutions and figuring out ways to do it. Like I said, that drop from 4 to 2.7, that started when the Paris Agreement was signed. And the Paris Agreement itself is just a goal. It's just, let's get this under 1.5. Here's what you guys have to do. Just write up a report every 5 years with your goals and send it in. It's not anything too restrictive, but by signing it, countries get to work and work together on it. So I thought that was a very promising outcome. Again, a lot more can be done. A lot of people thought the language was too soft or what have you, but I thought that was a cool milestone.
But about the fossil fuels, didn't the leader of this COP conference say that there wasn't enough supporting evidence for which fossil fuels shouldn't be used, or am I getting that wrong?
I think something to that effect, but
Yeah.
I know there were some countries in UAE may have been part. I know Saudi Arabia was pushing for this. That was basically trying to get the language to focus on emissions rather than fossil fuels.
Okay.
And on the one hand, sure, you math it out and whatever, but it is so much cheaper to just use clean energy sources. It actually saves you money to switch to clean energy sources. In the United States today, I think there's only one coal plant out of hundreds where it is cheaper to continue operating the plant than to shut it down and build a new solar or wind farm next door. That's where we're at now. It's so much cheaper to switch to clean energy. And so when fossil fuels are the primary contributor to climate change, and it's so much cheaper to just transition away than to try to rely on fossil fuels with carbon capture and storage or what have you, it made sense to at least mention it by name in a UN treaty.
Yeah. I was surprised when you said that it was the first time it was ever mentioned.
Yeah.
Why do you think they never mentioned it? Like, it's just they omitted it for, they don't want to make it political or something?
Well, these treaties, at least out of the outcome of these conferences, you need all 197 countries to sign the treaty. And you have countries who are largely reliant on fossil fuel exports for their economy. And it's a little scary to think about what that transition will look like for them. That said, to continue using Saudi Arabia as an example, that the Middle East is one of the fastest warming regions in the world because a lot of the Middle East is a desert. Deserts just suck up heat. And so it's actually already warmed faster than the rest of the world. And I believe there was a study that said by the year 2070, based on current trends, Saudi Arabia would be too hot to inhabit. So,
Really?
yeah.
Wow.
So
Wow. Okay.
they need to be part of this and they should really be at the front of the line fighting for this. But it's tough when your economy is also reliant on oil and gas. So there are absolutely opportunities for them to transition. It's one of the best places in the world to set up
Yeah.
solar. Think about the amount of
Oh yeah.
sunlight
Yeah,
they
right.
get.
Imagine. Yeah.
But that's got to happen. And right now, they're one of the countries that's been a bit resistant, but it's ultimately to preserve their country and to preserve the planet and everything else we've talked about. It's got to get done. So hopefully, um, yeah, we'll see how it all goes.
So by the year
Interesting.
2070, wow, it would be
So
inhabitable. That's crazy.
Based on current trends, if we
Yeah.
can continue to improve, maybe we'll see a better outcome for them.
yeah. Interesting. But I heard that Saudi Arabia is pushing towards more of a tourism industry. Like I hear they're like banking on a lot of different projects. One of them being the line that they're creating, which I find a bit ridiculous. There, the city that's going to be a line about I don't know how long this is going to go in the desert.
Wow. Didn't know
Oh, you
about that.
never heard about
No.
that? Yeah. It's like a city that they're building almost, yeah, in a desert that's, high. I don't know how high it is. And it's a line and it's like multi level. People live in there.
Wow.
I mean, they should work on everything. There's a lot of research that shows that countries who rely exclusively on a specific export for their economy are having way worse outcomes in democracy, in education, in economic stability because the export price may go up and down, in a lot of different things. And so it's in their best interest economically to pursue solar, to pursue tourism, to pursue all these different
To
things.
diversify more. Yeah.
Exactly. And then too, you get to come up on the world stage and say, look at us leading on climate, and maybe other countries start to like you more and work with you more. And so, yeah, I see it all as a win-win to push for that transition.
Yeah. And so now that we're talking about the cope and sort of solutions that countries are trying to work around, right? So we do hear that a lot of developing countries, third world countries, are oftentimes the I don't know the biggest polluters, maybe not the biggest polluters, but they use the most polluting energy sources, right? They don't have a lot of renewable energy sources. So my question is, should those countries care about climate change since they're still developing? A lot of times they say, why this is, you guys have the privilege to think about climate change, whereas we're trying to develop.
It really depends country to country, and broadly, yes, but the story changes depending on where you are. First off, though a lot of them are reliant on higher polluting technologies, they also just A lot of people don't have electricity access. They're often using way less energy than we do in the developed world. And if we look historically, I think the United States has contributed a quarter of greenhouse gas emissions to date. We're number 2 in the world now behind China, but and we've also reduced our emissions by around 20% from 2005 to today, which is something. But yeah, developed countries have contributed the most to the issue, even if they are getting a lot cleaner today. For developing countries, a lot of them are in the global south, where climate impacts have, on average, been worse than the global north. Um, and they also have a big opportunity in front of them where you can leapfrog over a lot of these fossil fuel technologies and get right to clean energy and batteries. And these technologies bring not just environmental benefits, but they bring a lot of economic and health benefits and justice benefits. Community solar is a great thing for a lot of these communities that don't have a national electric grid. Batteries can help a lot with that. Even like a nuclear plant can help with that if it's run safely. So I think it's a really great opportunity to help lift these countries out of poverty through climate solutions. But to do that, they need help, and you need other countries to step up, find partnerships, help implement these technologies. Some of that's happening, but you also have the reverse happening. We're talking about Saudi Arabia. They've kind of got this secret plan going on. I think it's called the Oil Sustainability Program, where they're basically trying to create like the cheapest possible gas powered vehicle to sell to developing countries so that they will be stuck using oil for another 3 decades, and a lot of things like that to lock them into oil based infrastructure so they can continue selling oil. For me in the US, for Canada, for all of these countries, let's go compete with that. Let's offer them something better economically and environmentally. And that way, everyone wins in terms of making money, and we help the climate at the same time. And we help lift these countries out of poverty. So, all good.
Yeah,
Okay.
that plan that you mentioned sounds like a plan to make a lot of money to me. Less than,
Yeah.
less than a plan to reduce the emissions and to help developing countries, right?
Well, yeah, because they're still hugely reliant on that. Okay, so from what I understand by your answer, then uh, polluting energy sources don't have to be a necessary evil for these developing countries necessarily. They can find ways to jump ahead even and help themselves grow.
Exactly. You can skip over all that and go straight to clean energy. Where it does get tricky is there are, for example, there are several countries in Africa that have large natural gas reserves and are very interested in exploiting them so they can sell that and make that part of their economy. And I do get the frustration there where it's like, we have this, you guys got to make money at this. Why can't we make money at this? Again, I would just go back to there's other better ways to do it. Natural gas, oil, these are very volatile products that swing up and down. And if you base your economy on that, it leads to worse outcomes because you just don't have much stability. If you can base it on not just energy, base it on a lot of different things. But the nice thing about solar is you set up a solar farm and you know about how much sun you're going to get, and you're going to have energy coming all the time. Same with wind, same with nuclear, assuming you can get the uranium, same with hydro, all these technologies. And then, yeah, have tourism, have all these other industries. And I think that's a much more sustainable way to grow an economy than to try to sell a resource that the developed countries are trying to move away from.
Yeah, I'm really interested in this solar energy, right, as a renewable source. Why is it that a lot more countries are not using this energy source?
I think it's growing, and the reason it took a little bit of time is it needed to develop and get better and get cheaper. The cost of photovoltaic solar dropped by 85% in the last decade, and onshore wind by 55%, batteries for electric vehicles by 85%. And that's a big part of why we're seeing a lot of this start to happen now. We're seeing policy, but we're also just seeing these things get better. I believe a couple years ago, 62% of newly installed renewable energy capacity in the world was cheaper than the cheapest fossil fuel alternative. So that's where this makes sense, right? Better for the environment, better for the economy. Let's make it happen. Before, there was a trade off, and that's tough. And so that's why I want to see things like electric vehicles, things that are earlier in their development, go through that process of getting cheaper, of getting better, because then it will compete, it will win, and we can do everything we want, and we don't have to pick one or the other.
I heard Elon Musk talk about fully powered vehicles with solar, but he says that we're extremely far from that. I don't know if you heard of that.
I didn't hear that one, no, but I'm
Yeah,
conceptually, I have heard of
yeah.
it.
I think he said that the technology is not that like ahead in order for us to have a fully powered
Okay.
solar car. Yeah,
I've heard of
That
it
would be
too,
hard
but
to do too, just
Yeah.
because, well, a lot of reasons. To get enough power on that small surface area,
exactly.
if you want to put it in your
Yeah.
garage. I mean,
yeah.
And I think the main reason was actually like the surface area part of the problem. Like it'll be hard to generate enough power just on that small surface area over the car.
yeah, there was a similar proposal that I thought was so cool when I was first getting into climate 6 years ago, called solar roadways. Those basically just
Mm.
replace all the roads with like giant solar paneled roads.
Yeah, I heard
And
of that
heard
one
of it.
too. Yeah,
it seems
that's
so
pretty
cool to
cool.
me because not only does it create energy, but it also leads to a reduction of. I was talking before about the albedo effect, which is the reflectivity of the Earth and how that can
Oh yeah,
affect
yeah,
heat. Roads are black or dark gray, and that sucks
yeah.
up so much heat, on a summer day.
Yeah,
So getting rid of that and switching to solar, you're capturing that heat for energy, and you don't have that albedo effect. But I looked into it more, and it was like, yeah, this is way too expensive and has not been developed nearly closely enough to work. And I'm like, yeah, that.
I heard a similar technology to that where the road would generate kinetic energy and you would basically get energy
well,
through
like
the
friction, with friction.
through the
Yeah,
friction of the car driving. It would charge up the battery, which I
I
was like,
I
wow.
actually,
guess that would.
the
Yeah.
guy who has the patent for that technology, we interviewed on the Sweaty Penguin podcast. That was one of my favorite
Oh,
Oh, really?
interviews. He has like 10
I'll have to talk
patents
to him.
for all different things that are just so creative like that. He's also worked in battery recycling, where
Okay.
when you take a battery out of a used electric vehicle, it still has like 85% of its life left oftentimes, but it's no
mm,
longer good for the EV and it's degraded. But he's figured out ways to recycle that and put it into the electric grid to store energy. So
oh,
lots of cool ideas out there, which I think can help EVs overcome some of the hurdles that we talked about earlier.
okay. And so, what about his patent there with the car regeneration?
That one's
You
really
know, what?
cool.
Yeah.
Again, I don't know how economically feasible it is, but again, like,
Okay.
have the
It's
idea.
an
Takes
idea.
time to develop it, work out the kinks, but go through that process and see where we come out, and hopefully it'll be part of the equation.
Yeah, that'd be really cool.
Yeah.
Could imagine that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it just goes to show it's just so many little pieces to the puzzle of climate change that
Yeah.
everyone needs to do their part in different departments, different, groups of people working on, the electric vehicle people, the people with nature and, transits and systems. I mean, it just goes on and on.
Yeah. And you said, everyone should do their part. Like, so do you think the individual could all make a difference, or is it going to be like legislation at the end of the day that's going to be the driving force?
It's all of the above. I think ultimately systemic change is what is needed to address the issue at scale, but there is a lot individuals can do if they want to do individual actions. Like for myself, like I still eat red meat, but one thing I've found is I'm not a big fashion person. Besides when I dress up for things like this, I prefer to just wear a t-shirt, and then if once it wears out, I turn it into a pajama shirt. And fashion is actually a very big contributor to emissions, to water use, to a lot of human rights issues. And so I I didn't know that. I just didn't really care about buying new clothes. But once I learned that, I saw, oh, I'm helping the climate by just reusing my clothes and not buying new clothes as much. So there are a lot of things like that that individuals can do, or maybe even are doing, and can just pat themselves on the back for. But then beyond that, I think using your voice, whether it's through voting, through activism, or for like, I never felt like I'd be a good activist. I am too into the nuance to ever create a sign that
Yeah.
says 4 words, but
Yeah.
I can write. I can do a podcast. I can come on to shows like this and talk to you guys. And I
Yeah.
think that's awesome too. You can. I just wrote an article on the Sweaty Penguin website about employees advocating in the workplace. I was at a webinar and heard from there was a guy at Microsoft who was just a paralegal, I think, and he went to one of the global hackathons that they do and connected with ocean conserve or no, it was ocean cleanup, and was like, hey, anything you need help with, let's work together. And they created a machine learning model that could look at pictures that ocean cleanup had of uh, waste from rivers that they pulled out, and kind of identify what was what and help them with their data collection. And then that spun into him and a colleague created a climate working group or something at Microsoft that now is like over 10,000 people in it, and has pushed the company to set goals for carbon neutral and zero waste, and like huge impact. Just one guy being like, hey, what can I do at work? So a lot individuals can do to affect change. And then the biggest thing I always tell people, talk to someone you disagree with. It doesn't have to be about climate, but we need to get better at having those conversations. And if we get more comfortable talking to people with different perspectives, learning how they think, how they tick, that will ultimately lead to easier climate conversations. We can find more common ground, and then we can find the best solutions possible and get them done.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think when you have a debate with someone, right, I think on each side of the argument, there are some valid points. So if you could have the debate, have the conversation, then you could make a better solution out of everyone's ideas. So I think it's a good point you brought up.
Yeah, I think the best solutions come when everybody's in the room and has their voice heard, and it's not like one side beating the other side to get it done.
I just wanted to ask maybe one more question. So you mentioned, these machine algorithms and how they were able to like clean up the ocean. I think you talked about. Uh, like, what about like the AI revolution? How do you think that's gonna impact this whole climate change problem?
We did an episode on it, and it was a while ago, so it's not fully fresh of mine, but I believe we kind of found that there's two sides to the story. On the one hand, AI can be part of a lot of climate solutions. Smart grids are a very cool technology that, rather than just the electric provider sending you electricity and it's this one-way stream, there's a two-way stream where you're sending back information, and AI systems can gather information and figure out, hey, here's when this person's using a lot more electricity, so we need to be sure that we have more storage capacity at that time. Most people use electricity from like 5 to 9 p.m. That tends to be where the peak is. And that's not when the sun is shining, and usually the wind blows at night. So you need to have
Mm-hmm.
storage in place to handle that. So you're not relying on, uh, I, I think peaker plants is the term for when power sources have to shift to fossil fuels later in the day. Um, so there's stuff like that you can gather, um, and AI can help with that. I remember we learned about AI robots that were going down to coral reefs, and I forget exactly what they were doing, but they were, I think they might have been dealing with, there's an invasive species that affects coral reefs that the AI could get rid of. So cool stuff like that. On the flip side, data centers are a huge energy consumer, and the more that AI grows, the more energy it can consume. And a lot of these plants do use clean energy, but that's clean energy that could go to powering people's homes and cars and businesses that is going to this instead. So I think it's important to get the energy to the right places rather than just have this big company be able to say they're carbon neutral while other people don't have access to it. And then the other piece is how equitable and just AI will be. I've seen cases where AI can be a lot worse at identifying uh, faces of Black people versus white people. And I know a lot of law enforcement wants to use AI to help with image recognition, and that can open a whole can of worms, especially when I know a lot of environmental protesters are very worried because there have been a lot of countries who try to crack down on these things and arrest people for exercising free speech, even if I don't agree with every protest tactic. I certainly don't want to see people arrested unfairly, and AI could be a tool used in that. So, pros and cons, just like everything else.
Yeah.
Hopefully, more of the pros than the
Mhm.
cons.
Yeah. Yeah, we've talked about AI extensively on this podcast at this point.
It is the
It always comes down
zeitgeist.
to that at the end, end of the day. That's the current climate at this point.
Yeah.
So yeah, we talked about a lot.
I mean, yeah, we had a closing question there, but I mean, you kind of answered it, and your other answers there, where we were gonna ask, like, since climate change is such a big issue and has many solutions, a lot of individuals sometimes feel like they're powerless. But I was gonna ask, like, what is one thing they could do, to help with climate change? But I guess it was just to talk more about it and to, discuss and propose solutions, at their workplace or
I think
wherever.
that's the biggest thing. Talk to people. Talk to people you disagree with is the biggest thing I tell people. Doesn't even have to be about climate. It can be about sports or books or movies, but just having those conversations, getting more comfortable. Then the next step from there is, yeah, advocate in your workplace. If you like writing like I do, you can write about it. If you don't mind going out and protesting, do that. I don't throw soup at paintings, but something else. um, yeah, there's so many ways people can contribute, but yeah,
What are your thoughts, just kind of on the side here? I find it really ridiculous. Some of these protesters, like, go to museums and throw paint, yeah, or glue themselves to the
yeah,
wall or to the floor. And
they're
have you
giving
heard
us
I've
a
about
never heard of
bad
those?
that.
rap,
No,
No.
man. I
that's
Yeah,
wild.
definitely gives a bad rap.
yeah, I've written about this a bit. I think that it's I don't love that tactic, and I think not only do I just find it stupid, but it's actually flawed in its reasoning. A lot of the organizations behind those protests, like Extinction Rebellion, Just Stop Oil, they believe in what's called the 3.5% rule, which is something that there was a researcher, Erica Chenoweth, who they did a study that found of like several mass protest movements around the world, if 3.5% of the population mobilized, they saw the change that they wanted. And the so a lot of these organizations basically say, okay, well, if we can get 3.5% of the population on our side, then we get the job done. There's a few problems with this. First off, this study was specifically looking at maximalist campaigns, which would be to overthrow a dictator or achieve territorial independence, something where you can say black or white, this worked or this did not work. An environmental protest is not black or white. You can't have a protest and see it as a success or a failure necessarily, unless you're maybe advocating a very specific policy get passed or something, which usually is not what these things are doing. Number two, it's a lot easier today to mobilize people because of social media and technology. So it may just not apply in the future if it starts to like the equivalent of inflation, but with protesting. And then number three, and this is what I think is the most important, getting 3.5% of the population protesting means you have a pretty significant majority of people who support your cause, because not everyone who supports a cause is going to go protest, right? I'm a climate advocate. I don't protest. It's not part of who I am. So for a movement like Extinction Rebellion, that I believe they have like 18% approval in the UK, they, even if they got, I mean, they're not going to get 3.5% because a lot of people don't like them. And the people who do like them probably aren't going to go protest unless they're maybe a tenth of that 18% at best. So that's kind of the issue with it. And so what I've tried to say is I I agree climate's a big issue, but I think that these protests really only serve to alienate people. There's actually polling that has shown that people's approval for climate policy has gone down after some of these protests. And so I think the reasoning behind it is flawed, and they'd be a lot better off just working to find common ground, find solutions people like, get into communities, talk to people. And I'm sure there's a role for protest in there. I'm not an expert on protest, but yeah, this is not the way to do it.
It's too much of a complex issue to just throw paint, at a painting in a
And
museum.
what are you? I mean, there was, I think, a week or two ago, some protesters disrupted a Broadway show in New York City. I'm like, I would venture to guess most people in a Broadway audience already are pretty aware about climate change and care about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I think that sometimes some of this energy gets wasted and it just inconveniences people and makes this harder.
Well,
Yeah,
that's the thing. Yeah.
we had a lot of protests here in Quebec, like late last year for like school tuition increases, and like it was like really disruptive. Like, yeah, like they're allowed to protest, but like it just delayed a lot of the school calendar for a lot of the students. A lot of school students weren't going to school. Like it's yeah, of course you're allowed to protest, but I feel like everyone should, not everyone should suffer because of like some protest is going on.
No, the point of
Yeah.
climate solutions, in my view, is to bring people together. And if you're
Yeah.
working against that, I just
You're
think it's
dividing.
counterproductive. And it's unnecessary because, like I've been saying this whole time, climate solutions aren't sacrifices. They help the environment, the economy, our livelihoods, our health, our justice, our security. And if you show people that and you just have these conversations, I think this is a lot simpler than having to fight to get all this done. We can do it together.
Yeah, well said, man. We appreciate all your insight on all these topics that we covered today.
Yeah.
So,
quite a
can you
bit.
tell everyone where they could find you, social media? Tell them about your podcast as well.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. You can find me at Ethan Brown 5151 on all the social media. The Sweaty Penguin podcast, I encourage people to check out at thesweatypenguin.com. We're in a bit of a transition right now. We ended up losing our funding to do the podcast. And so what we're working on now is there's actually, it was inspired by a course at the University of Kansas that replaced their textbook with the Sweaty Penguin, which was very cool. And
Really?
I'm actually going to be visiting them on Monday and
Wow.
Tuesday. But
Congrats on that.
yeah, so I've been putting my energy now into, first off, we just launched a new website today, or a new redesign of the website. So there's more news stuff, more more on there for people to check out, but also working to create educational resources for other professors to bring the Sweaty Penguin into their classrooms. I think that's a lot more fun than reading a textbook, and I think we have some good resources for that. So encourage people to go check us out, join our Patreon page at patreon.com/thesweatypenguin, and help us keep that work going.
Awesome.
Great. Spreading good
Yeah,
information.
keep up the good work.
Thanks
You really
so
have
much.
some good information to share. Yeah.
Yeah, appreciate you having me. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was. I appreciate you.
Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for going on. Yeah.